Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and down here in Rio Rico, South Tucson, Southern Arizona. It's such
Baja, Arizona.
Baja, Arizona, and it's such a high honor to connect with a absolutely incredible synthesis and a guy who has been really at the forefront of incredible ambient music since its beginning and its inception. He's also collaborated with many of my dear comrades on my journey. And I had a chance to see him play live at the Berger Performing Arts Center in Tucson a couple of months ago, and it was an absolutely awe-inspiring experience. Steve Roach, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Such an honor, Jake. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
No, it's beautiful, and I'm so humbled. Did you get to see the Go Band with Stomu and Klaus Schultz? I'm curious about. We lost Klaus, obviously,
Right.
and I wanted you to not just talk about his significance, but if you knew about that band, Demiola and Winwood and those cats, if you were hip to them.
Right. So, Go, absolutely, at that juncture of those guys collaborating and already being aware of them independently, I never saw them live. I think they played just a few gigs in America. And
Yeah, that's right. Mostly overseas. Yeah.
Right, New York, and at that point, I know you have talked with Patrick Gleason, but he sat in for Klaus, basically. I mean, he was, right?
That absolutely. That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
So
And Peter Robinson too, I think.
Pete Robinson, yeah. So I was making sure that was fact there, but because they performed so little, and over here, I never saw that lineup, and never saw Klaus because he never really played in America.
Right.
I ended up playing in Germany, and I toured for many years over there, but I ended up meeting Klaus at a big festival. Just he came to the festival, but that was as close as we got to doing anything, was just meeting each other and being aware of each other. But yeah, Michael Shreve, that whole entry into the blending of all these genres, those guys were really right there with that.
I couldn't ask a better person. I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, you were at the forefront or a pioneer of what they call ambient music. I've gone back and interviewed, I never got to Subotnick yet, but I've interviewed other cats who were doing early synthesizer stuff that Gleason was doing with Herbie. What would you say was like the precursor to ambient music? I mean, Go was clearly more of like a rock,
Progressive rock.
prog rock, and I'm curious if you could talk about if there was a style of music before ambient music. I mean, it was named that, but what would you say was the precursor to what you pioneered?
Yeah, so the music, or let's say the sound opening that really brought me into a place of feeling I have to create this. I know already how to create it. I have to live in this sound world. And so that those earliest seeds were planted by the earliest Pink Floyd, the early Floyd,
Really?
like the Uma Guma and Obscured by Clouds and Metal and just all the early experimental stuff was like the one of the portals for that. And then from that place, then it became, as far as electronic, like the beginning of like yes is Close to the Edge, for example. I mean, it's 2 minutes of a space I wanted to never hear stop. I wanted that to go for 30, 40, 50 longer minutes. And so those planted the seeds. But more than that, I would say more than any music was like I grew up in San Diego County, and I grew up out in the desert a lot. I grew up in an environmental space that really had sound and music emanating from it all the time anyway. And so when I started hearing instrumental music or music that didn't have a sense of what it was being made by, it's like, this is what I have to do. I have to create this. So early on, before the music that was coming through in complete visions or in fragments was, the environmental influence. But
Well, let's talk about the environment, because I think that's fascinating. I mean, were you hip to Harry Partch? Did you know Harry Partch?
I knew his music.
Okay, so he had his own octave. I mean, but also, not that you were creating your own instruments, but when you were out in the environment, let's just talk about natural environment.
Yeah, desert spaces.
Sounds. Talk
Yeah.
about some of the sounds that were.
Well, probably the sounds, and more than the sounds, was that roaring sense of silence, where you're hearing sound come emanating from silence, and so that, and even saying that right now, I can have that sensation like come into my consciousness of there's another layer of sound. And so when I started hearing music that incorporated silence along with sound, which would be Parch, and which was really, really important here, that is so great to share with you, because I rarely get that question.
Sure.
Is that the early ECM music was the essence of that.
To talk specifically about which artists.
So the concerts that were probably the most like paradigm shifters for me was Ralph Towner and John Abercrombie. Timeless, that particular
Oh
album.
my God, dude! It's like okay. Explain that. Also, by the way, just for the record, Glenn Moore from Oregon.
Yeah.
He lives in Arvaka. I don't know if you knew that.
Really?
Yeah, I've been down there a couple times. Go ahead, continue. I know we
Incredible.
talk. Paul Horn is such magic down here, man.
Incredible. So
Towner, Abercrombie. I know Saguar. I know that album.
Timeless, that segues into my relationship with Lee Underwood, and which we'll certainly dive deep into there. So, but that, the early ECM music, that kind of European, which was like really a precursor to what became marketed in America as ambient through Windham Hill and these other or New Age.
Absolutely.
So the early ECM, which was about sacred space, about silence, about tone, about the power of just the resonance of beautiful sounds from instruments being played with reverence, and also that sense of space, and then the fact that where they were recording it in Norway, and their whole sense of how they were recording it with Manfred producing it, their use of reverb, all of that. But Timeless, with the two guitar players like interweaving together. There was a theater in San Diego County called the La Paloma Theater, and that was the sacred ground for that early ECM. And I saw Herbie's like thrust period there.
Oh, you saw like the Headhunter band.
Yeah. And
now that's well. So I you have to remind me, because I've seen that the album. I don't know if you've ever seen that Towner Glenn Moore album called Duets from like '71, which is also early ECM.
It's in that realm of what was going on with Timeless, I would think.
Was there a percussionist on Timeless or no?
No, it was just the two.
It was just guitars going at Abercrombie and Towner going at it. These are my heroes. I love these.
Your Abercrombie interview, I heard that.
Dude, George Marsh, my hero drummer, connected me with. So if he's listening somewhere,
that interview was just absolutely
profound. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And you got to listen to my Towner interview, because it's equally as profound.
Yeah, I'll need to go there. But
those cats were the Colin Walcott. Was there ever
the Oregon piece?
Well, no, the ECM, because he was doing a lot of stuff. I mean, even guys like Jack DeJohnette, who's a drummer,
right,
was playing very. I'm just thinking about the rhythmic component of that ECM and how intoxicating that was for you as well. I mean,
it was all of that was, I'm just voracious at that time in my life, just listening, looking, drawing it in, regardless of what it's called. It made no difference, and it had nothing to do with that. It was about the feeling that was being generated through this combination of whatever kind of instruments, and a lot of it was not electronic based. At that time, I mean, it was creating space, and it was creating a dimension of putting you in a location, putting you into an experience, and but eventually, the electronic instruments, the things you see here, those became like the surgical tools for me that I could create, much like a painter in his studio. I mean, I was really drawn also towards just learning and absorbing, but not working in a group setting, because the things that I wanted to experience were so highly personalized and driven from an uncompromised place, and it wasn't about building or developing group. Although I played in LA in the formative years, I did a lot of improvising, played in.
Well, that's, I got to be honest, in my notes here, as I was waiting for you to pick me up, Bryce Robley and Liner Mobius. I want to know about this band, because that to me, I mean, we can get into the whole idea of what you said waxed so beautifully before about just the having fierce individual feelings about the music and wanting
Right.
to create in your own. And I was like, I get off so much on the conversation amongst people. So can you talk about Mobius? That to me, because that band was inception before you joined, but eventually you did join. Is that right?
Yeah, and how that worked was I was working in an independent record store, just vinyl junkie, like getting
In
imports.
San Diego, or
Yeah, in La Mesa, California. Albums would come in from Europe. I'd get
oh, this is unbelievable.
Klaus Schultz albums. I'd pop them out of the box from JEM Imports, pull them out. This was like your drug delivery was the music.
I dig, man.
You would just, so I tiny little store, La Mesa Music Machine, all the early Eno, all the stuff that was coming in that was just mind blowing. So a magazine came in a small bundle, and it was called Synapse Magazine. It was published out of L.A. And I look in the masthead, and it's got Bryce Robley, Doug Linner, cast of other characters in there that ultimately I would meet all of them. So I immediately contacted them in L.A. just with this really kind of like a born-again fervor, but for electronic music and music that's on the edge and that is coming into the horizon line here. And so I live in San Diego. I'll do whatever I can to help promote the magazine. Before I knew it, I was, running the magazine around to different stores, representing those guys, and I go up and meet them. And they're a couple years older. They're already studying at Cal Arts with Morton Subotnick. They're studying with
Subotnick was there. He was on faculty there.
Yes, and they studied with him, and so. And all those names, I was learning quickly who these guys were.
At this point, you had you had your own rigs at this point, or were you still just a fanatic kind of?
Yeah, at that point, the music store was my, passion, and
Sure.
eventually moved to L.A. and worked in licorice pizza stores there, famous stores. But at that point, yeah, I had basically got a high interest loan, a mega expensive stuff at that time, and I bought an ARP 2600, ARP string ensemble, Micro Moog, Echo Machine. Had written Klaus Schultz a letter, born just with that kind of fervor, and he wrote back saying, "That's fantastic. Do you have an Echo Machine?" That kind of stuff. So we, laughed about that when we met years later. So
when did you start? You started to play live with them though.
And I started playing live 6 months after I bought all that stuff. I played in the back of a record store for 50 people in San Diego. I put a set together.
Are there tapes of this?
There is.
Oh, I got to hear this. This is unbelievable. You had a private part. You weren't releasing an album or anything, were you?
No, these were. I've got it sitting on the shelf in here. It's my first concert ever.
So beautiful.
At Licorice Pizza, and again, just brought the community in, and immediately it was the same thing that happens now. You do a concert, people come up afterwards and say, "I went to these places, I felt these feelings," 45 years ago or something like that, with early analog synths and that sort of thing. So, but I had that gear, met up with those guys, and they were at the hub of the whole burgeoning electronic music scene in LA. So they said, "Well, we're here. Why don't you, one thing led to another. I ended up moving up there and sleeping in Bryce Robley's living room. And they really, were incredible in that they gave me, a lift up. And again, I did not come from an academic background. I wasn't going to university. And I tried to take electronic music class at a local junior college, and the pace they were moving at was so lugubrious. It was just insane. It was so slow. So I just had to make my way. So these guys really took me in there, and before I knew it, I was doing concerts with them, and the music was not my direction of music for sure. It was really like a combination of Kraftwerk and Devo, or it was more pop.
It's fascinating.
But I was able to work in a 24-track studio at that time, and I was connecting and interfacing with everybody from Tom Oberheim to Don Preston to the whole scene in LA was just like blowing up at that time. And electronic music was just, starting to peek up out of the sidewalk, in terms of, and the other big stories that I've never really shared is that Mobius, we were doing shows around in like Madame Wong's and punk clubs and YouTube.
Madame Wong's, what was that?
That was at the peak of punk and new wave, that whole era in the early '80s.
Oh my God. This
And
is great.
U2 had played there before they had really had
Right. This is a lot. It was a kind of a jumping off place for.
right, and it was L.A. the whole L.A. scene at that point. So of course we all know the Troubadour,
I do. Don.
Weston's Troubadour. So Bryce and those guys were starting to play more concerts, more people are coming out, fascinated by this trio of synthesizer guys. And so he goes, well, let's see, this was in the early 80s of the Troubadour. Whoever you could track, whoever was playing at that time, like the night before, would have been Linda Ronstadt.
Joni Mitchell.
All that
yeah.
sort of thing. So then we somehow got our way wedged in there. And this was like the first time that Troubadour had heard anything like this. It said, well, you can do a concert at the Troubadour on a Sunday afternoon. So we did an electronic music concert at the Troubadour after, whoever knows what was going on the day before. So we were just really pushing the boundaries there. We're taking this music out into all these different places all over LA. And then eventually, I met up with them at Chapman, the inventor of the stick, Chapman stick. And then started playing. And the venues that would bring us in would be like Come Back In, the jazz venue in Venice.
I'm so honored that because that was I mean, I guess that was also like the thing. I've been listening to a lot of. I just found this Stanley Turrentine album that he's covering a Coltrane tune called Impressions, and I was thinking, I'm like, in terms of your comp, have you done a homage to Coltrane through all your synthesizers? Have you paid homage? Not that those guys were necessarily people that you were seeing live as a kid, but that burning, visceral, can that translate over into the synthetic realm? Have you ever attempted that?
Well, I mean, that burning, visceral, like going for everything,
Happens all the time. No, I mean, I witnessed that.
Yeah, you hear it in
I heard
work.
it.
But as far as a direct relationship, and I was listening to Miles and listening to Coltrane, but there was never a direct, like, I'm going after this feeling in it. It was more like this, like tapping into the essence and the spiritual realm these guys are drawing from.
Can you talk about how you learn to dock emotionally and enter that, even in a live performance? When I saw you, I mean, it was just mind melting in so many ways, but part of it was like, clearly, nothing was rushed. You eased into it, and pretty soon the palette was just full. It was sonically completely full. But in terms of getting out of your own way, can you talk about learning to get out of your own way and ultimately enter that sacred space where you're kind of just giving everything away?
Yeah, that's a really big question. That's a question that, well, it's answered over the dedication to just diving in as deep as you can into this, what I call the sound current. And that's just, it's beyond the 10,000 hours. It's just like where you're immersed in it day and night. You're just going to sleep with it. You're waking up with it. You're in it all day. You're in it all night. And then you're developing, for me, a visceral connection to all these instruments, the way any dedicated musician would find with their dedicated sax player, guitar, particular single instrument, because these instruments, for me, I realized early on, there's such a potential to have this emotional dexterity, this kind of way that you can shapeshift, and you can be playing something really delicate and really more in a contained traditional kind of realm, and then just almost instantly you can shapeshift into something that's terrifying. It's absolutely visceral and
Haunting. Yeah,
right, and so it's like the ability to move in through all these worlds through your own training of and your own ability to give yourself the freedom and to have the courage to go into that place. And I mean, courage, meaning to be that raw and to be that emotionally available and that vulnerable.
Vulnerable, absolutely.
Because playing that stuff out live, and my friends will tell you after a concert, I'm absolutely like quivering, for a while. I'm so raw that I can hardly be around anybody, because you're just like, it's like a
I'm
stage.
with you, man. It's so beautiful. I think that, but maybe you could just. Maybe the better question was, when did you recognize? Maybe because I mean, you didn't come up in the academy,
Right.
You didn't learn some sort of curriculum.
Right.
You were, I guess, pretty much an ear trained musician.
Yeah, it's just autodidact or whatever.
Exactly. But was there not a defining moment, but a point in time where you recognized that you were only partially responsible for
Yeah.
that actually you were a conduit? Is there a moment in your? I'm talking when you started to do solo performances.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, Jake. And that was so almost immediate. Once I had my collection of essential tools around me, and I did this first concert in the back room of a Licorice Pizza record store in Pacific Beach.
Licorice Pizza. I got it. I've heard of that. I got it.
Yeah, it's a chain store that was really, I mean, like all music stores during our formative years, that was where you met everybody.
Absolutely.
All the stuff came together. That's where you'd go on nights and be searching through for the sacred texts from coming in from wherever.
The Upanishad, yeah, totally.
All of that.
Yeah.
So I'm in the back, and then you've got you have at that time there was the Black and Ocean Beach, which was like the ultra hip head shop, with this Gino that ran the place. He was just this mythical looking character. He looked like he was almost Mongolian, super long black hair, and just dramatic, and then you have this whole collection. So this was like the first gathering of the tribes for this concert in the back of this record store. I've been playing the gear for 6 months, just with this born again fervor, and you're gathered there, for this ceremony, and let the ceremony begin, and then you just shove off, and then it happens, and it happened right there. I had the tools. I had enough knowledge to get through an hour and a half set, and at that moment, I could feel that whole transformation that happens when you let go to it, And there was enough skill. Again, I'd put in like some serious amount of time that I could in a year or so with having the gear, and then 6 months prepping or whatever the timeline was. It was really quick that I was out, and I realized that I had this compulsion and this real need to share this with people, but share it as an individual, as a solo artist. That was really a clear.
Now, why explain that? Because just for on a very superficial level, some people would say that, well, clearly, his ego's tied up in this. But you just, or the idea of saying, I have these sounds in my head, and nobody else can compliment me. So explain. I want you to break down this
the
fervor of the solo.
Being a solo artist really comes from, well, the essence of it is that I'm an only child.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm really I'm really comfortable being alone, and I have to negotiate time. Even now, I need to have a lot of alone time after all these years, and that's where the ability to focus and go down the rabbit hole to learn all this and to spend hours and hours, like before the Tucson concert. I mean, that was sometimes 15, 20 hours a day working through that set for 3 or 4 weeks to get to that place to where you're just completely letting go to the flow. So
I want to be clear.
Yeah,
it's not. This is not. That was not a rote concert. Can you talk a little bit? To me, you got it ingrained enough where you then could just be in that flow.
Right, and through all these concerts I do, I mean, just played in this fantastic cathedral in New York City next to the Guggenheim in June at the Church of the Heavenly Rest. Oh, man. And so that place, I'm preparing. I mean, at the Burger Center, I played there before, but for a certain amount of weeks, I put myself into these places and just I go there, I absorb it and feel it, and then let the venue itself fill me up with what I want to bring to it. And so the preparation for that is not a rehearsal. It's just that you're going into this space and you're focusing and you're trying out and basically build. It's like almost like in an athlete where you're building muscle, you're building the agility to move between these worlds.
Once the game comes, you let the natural ability
Right,
just
and you
go.
can't compare like, wow, that sounded amazing yesterday. I got to walk back in my footsteps from yesterday. You have to just keep walking forward into that new space where you're having that experience and you're feeling. I'm sharing it with you, and we're all there discovering as it's unfolding. So
It is unfolding. In that concert that we saw, how much? I mean, you're not playing the American songbook and leaving the head of the tune and improvising, but there is improvisation. Can you talk a little bit about the improvisation within the structure of your music?
Yeah, there's absolutely structure. There's a roadmap. That's what I spend a great deal of time is building how you enter into the space and how you set up a certain opening for something then to emerge out of that, and then build it, and then embrace the audience and calm things down. And it's almost like you're in a sweat where you come in and you cool it down with cooling water. And
It's like a big organism that's just growing constantly.
right, and it's growing, and then it's deconstructing, and
Right.
it comes back down again. And then there's pieces from certain albums like Dreamtime Return that thematically they're folks who know my music will hear, well, that's Looking for Safety, that's Magnificent Gallery, that's The Gone Place, that's Heart Breath. I mean, then every time I'm playing it, and much like jazz, you have your skeletal structure, and you can go off on it and come back to it. And so in that way, there's still like this sense of connection with the audience where they're hearing this piece of music that they were so moved by 20 years ago, but now they're finally hearing it live, but it's completely alive and breathing in a whole new way now. And for me to perform it like that too, I mean, it's always, and more so as I grow deeper into this experience of playing live, as I'm learning even more about pulling the boundaries back and my own sense of like, well, I want to stay within the confines of how I normally play this piece. Now I'm pulling the curtain back on that even more, and going further and further off into like taking it more into a whole other, more dissonant kind of direction, or bringing in other aspects that are more sustained and more, a lot more space within that. But to go kind of rewind a little bit and
Please.
go back to the solo impulse,
Yes.
is really it's just that freedom that you have when I early on realized that if I'm working with a group, and I've worked with groups and I've played live with groups, and I do that at certain times, and when you have that connection that is telepathic, like you see in the greatest bands that we grew up with
Ever.
then there's that piece that's just bewilderingly unbelievable. Like, how does that, when I would see Mahavishnu, it's like, how is this happening? How is this happening? And so, and
Did you see Jan with the
Yeah,
early Moog with the original band with Rick Laird and those cats?
yeah, all that, yeah.
This is the other thing I want you to talk to younger cats about specifically. It doesn't matter what instrument they're playing or whether they're doing solo composition or whatever. Is there a story about, I've talked to so many studio cats like David Spinoza, and guitar player, and Louis Shelton. Again, this is in the recording studio, but like on Right Place, Wrong Time, Arif Mardin and Dr. John brought Spinoza, and he was going to a jingle. They said, hey, we need you to overdub a guitar solo on this tune. And so he just like tunes up really quick, and he's like, okay, they're going to give me a couple takes, so I'll take one. And, he overbent a string, basically hit a clam, and was like, okay, let me do it again. And they're like, nope, that's perfect, you're done. And that turned into a hit tune.
There it is.
Louis Shelton clammed a Monkees tune, Last Train to Clarksville, thank you. Is there a time in Steve Roach's career where a clam led to, not necessarily on a recording album, but a clam led to new vocabulary in music? Because just younger kids today, they're hung up, at least with a broad brush, they're hung up a little bit on perfection too much, when in reality, a clam is a gateway. And I just wanted you to talk about that in your own career.
Yeah, I mean, and the clam is such a subjective piece as well, in that, a clam, if you have the expectations of how you rehearsed it or how you played it or how you're presenting it or what people are used to hearing, I mean, it can be, they always say, well, if you hit like wrong notes, then like do it again. You know,
That's what my Herbie's like. What if I hit? He's like, play it again.
right.
Play it again.
And then play it a third time and get even more into
Put
it.
a chord on it, and then just go with it. And everyone and that's in a group setting. But for you, I mean, was there a time where you were like, where a clam led to something transformative in a composition?
Well, live, I mean, I can't pull out exactly one at the moment, but I would say on a regular basis,
Unbelievable.
because that's part of the collaboration with the other side of what you're doing, is that I have to set up pieces of like it's not necessarily a clam bake, but it's like a certain number of options for things to happen and take you out of your groove and out of the way you're normally used to
Out of
doing
your
it.
thinking mind. Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
when you're using this amount of technology live, which is also like, jumping out of a plane, and sometimes, that's why I have to set my setup up. That's like trusting some guy to pack your parachute, and then you go out and you pull it, and it's like, uh-oh, what happened there? But even in that case, when I set up my system, I mean, I'm not setting up explicitly situations, but there's things that happen, especially with the large modular that I showed you in the other room with the patch cords and all that stuff. There's things that happen, and you have to be so spontaneous, and you have to, like, well, if that thing went out of tune, then you have to find where that place wants to be now. And then that's another level of being completely in the present moment and inventing and finding, a whole. So I would say there's a lot of pieces I could point out on albums where I had no expectation of this happening, and then that created this fantastic whole passage that I responded to.
Well, that was the other thing that I wanted to dovetail in, is that guys like, I had a chance to interview, the rhythm section for Pat Metheny, Mark Egan, and
Lyle
and Danny Gottlieb. I haven't gotten to Lyle yet, but I asked them sort of the idea. It's kind of a lost art, and I wanted to ask you about your own materials. How many tunes, compositions would you road test live? A lot. Like, for instance, when Metheny went on the road, I forget what album it was, late 70s album, they played like 180 shows of stuff they never recorded. They had, and those tunes grew and took on a life of their own in the live setting, so that when they went into the studio, it was burning.
Right.
And the Grateful Dead did that a lot too, where they took 7 years, and they never went in the studio. They played it live.
Right. And
how much of your tunes do you live test, and then they really take on, they assume a life force at that point before you record them?
Right. And also to add to that, like the Metal from Pink Floyd, I mean, they replayed that live for a year before they recorded
That's
it.
a very good point.
And,
Thank you.
So in any case, what's interesting there is that a lot of what I have been releasing lately has been a lot of live albums in different venues, which always influences the outcome of the music as we're speaking to. But the actual...
Yeah, you could record a live performance, of course.
Right, and so the Tucson was recorded.
Right.
I'm getting ready to release the Ambient Church live in New York City. And so what you're hearing then in that recording is the actual discovery and the evolution of that right in front of your ears, right in front of your eyes. So that's happening where it's really, at that point, it's also transcending what used to be, I would say, a live recording, because what I'm doing in a live setting is I'm inviting a number of people into my studio here. But I have the tools, I have the recording equipment, I have great technology to recapture everything. So in that sense, it's very similar to how I work when I'm working in here, is I get a lot of things going live. I get my band, working with me. And so I'm recording magic tracks, what I call them. So it's a lot of things that happen in here that happens where it's unfolding and I'm capturing it, instantly. And then I'll take that and then I'll live with it, and I might, it's like a photographer, or you're taking, like, if the sunset is happening and you're taking like as many shots as you can as that light is shifting. And then you'll come back and you'll work with different gradations of that shifting that happened over the last 15 minutes. So when I'm recording in the studio, that kind of approach to where you're shaping it, responding, evolving it in a shorter period of time can be a magic track that then I can then start working with and then develop over 2 or 3 months, and then take that piece and then melt it down, and then take it out live, and then have the whole live experience of what we're tapping into, how you go to a whole other plane, and then have that come back in and inform that. So it gets really baked in like a layered cake in a sense of all that sort of thing, all that kind of inspiration.
Even for your earliest albums, like the one
Now is the first album.
yeah, the second one with an et.
Structures from Silence.
Yes, like are there? Have you always been? Have you had an allegiance to the idea of playing the songs live since the beginning, or on those early albums was some of that stuff recorded first and then maybe you'd go and tour it?
Yeah, the live piece came out of the pure fact that I was to create music as a solo artist, I had to create it live. I had to get a lot of things.
Magic tracks.
Yeah, I mean, the magic tracks would certainly come from playing live in the studio, but how I would like Structure from Silence, which really hit a nerve and still has. I mean, it's probably one of my most popular, successful, timeless albums, but that was recorded in the time it takes to hear it. It was just recorded straight out.
Wow.
And here, you know, in that sense. So, the early years when I couldn't afford to go into studio, I had to just create and record in the moment, and then I would get that experience directly. I would just record it, reach over, hit play, hear it, respond to it, do another take. Eventually I started going into studios and started getting into the multi-track thing. But that's why playing live and playing live in the studio is pretty seamless at that point. And so there was that quality of urgency and this is really, you're going for it. This is really like a lot of the early, you know, our favorite jazz pieces that you hear, they're created right there. You're hearing it.
And I guess they're playing beyond what they know too. They're really they're going for it.
Right.
And that's the kind of music that I mean, you're such a pro that when I saw you at the Burger, it was like lungs and a heart. It was like a breathing in and out, but then it would just, like you said, it was just perfect, you know?
Man, thank you so much. And that, again, it's that, I come back to this term, this kind of agility, this agility to move between all these worlds and then be completely committed to that space where I could play something really gentle and completely from the heart. And then I'm setting up through that process. I mean, there is like, here's what's coming. I know I'm setting up, like I'll start out like I did in Tucson where it's a welcome. I'm embracing the audience. I know we've come from all over. We need to like get into a collective place together.
Get on the same page, yeah.
And then from there, okay, now we're going to get serious now. Now we're going to start shaking the cage. We're going to start pushing the boundaries. We're going to start pushing the volume. We're going to bring, do the full range of like activating, the full body experience and build that up, and then let all the water drain out again, and then have these kind of cathartic waves. Then that's how I build these sets, is to have these waves where it gets more and more intense, and then the releases are more welcomed, and then you build it up again, and then eventually, I built up to this piece in there called The Gone Place, which had a very strong John Hassell influence in it, with the elemental organic percussion that it's not really placed in an electronic like Klaus Schulze realm or any kind of techno, but it's more organic and pulsing and throbbing, and then ocarina flutes, and then
you had like not the cuica but the calabash. I mean, you were shaking those.
Like a seed pod shakers, and then that built up to the whole big piece with didgeridoos with Serena Gabriel and Dashmesh Khosla coming in and building up that whole piece in the middle that was just like a complete primal rebirth.
Oh, I could have listened to that for hours. What I meant to say before we were chatting off air was the first time you played or recorded with a trap set was with Michael. Was that? I want you to take us through the Michael Shreve thing, because
sure. That's big.
He's a dear friend. It's actually really funny because his best friend, David Garibaldi from Tower of Power, is his birthday today.
Oh, yeah.
So the whole thing is beautiful. I'm down here. Steve Roach, the floor is yours. Michael Shreve, take it away.
Michael Shreve, man, just so incredible soul brother, Michael. And of course, I grew up as we did listening to his work and the legacy that he's tapped into, of course, with Woodstock and Carlos and Abraxas. I mean, I heard, all that early material. And
You were too young to go to Woodstock. I mean,
I remember one guy from my high school just had gotten back, and he looked like he got beamed in from another planet, just kind of wandering around that the next weekend. Somehow he had to be at the right place.
Totally. Man.
So in any case,
the weather held up for Santana for that trip for that.
That was good.
Festival,
yeah. And so
you were hip to him.
very much so. Through his Carlos work, and then getting the timing. So yeah, then the work with Stomu and Klaus, and then I think his Automatic Man had happened by that point.
My man, absolutely.
All that stuff.
Mid '70s Automatic Man,
Yeah,
sure.
that whole period I was tracking Michael, and it was just, it was like a distant star that you're like, oh my God, and he's working with Klaus now, Klaus Schulze, who was, again, like and so just a micro dose of like influence there was like seeing the early days of Klaus Schulze on the albums, sitting here with just synths everywhere. That is me. I am doing this. This is
the distant star, and then you got to find the star.
Right. And so eventually, when Michael did Transfer Station Blue, it came out on Fortuna Records, which was my label at that time, my first label that put out Structures from Silence. And then Ethan, who ran the label, Bay Area, fantastic guy. And then he was, connected with Michael, and then we were talking, and one thing led to another. And very quickly, at that point, I was living in Venice Beach. And then he said, well, I can put you guys together. And it's like, of course. And then I was, just humbled and kind of shaking in my boots there, talking with Michael, and then immediately was just like
put at ease, right?
Yeah, we were just like,
so beautiful, man.
And,
it's
and
freaking beautiful.
It's
man.
like, well, let's go. And he flew in, and I had this house in Venice. I mean, just a humble little, nice 24-channel board and some recording gear, and this Ensoniq ESQ1 synthesizer that he had, so we knew how to both work that thing. And Droberheim drum machine, and he brought, he was using an Octapad playing samples at that point. So he came in for a week, and then it ended up being another week, and then we tracked the whole album. We just hit it off and just were absolutely hanging and just getting to know each other and sharing stories. And the next thing you know, we're picking up Jonas Hellborg at the airport.
Beautiful,
He's flying in
beautiful.
with John McLaughlin. They're playing at the Greek, and we meet John, and there's Jonas Hellborg.
Oh, this is so great.
We
This
bring-
is so with the Greek in LA.
Yeah, and we
Unbelievable.
bring Jonas over really quickly for an afternoon, like to lay bass down on my Tascam 8-track, with Michael. I remember, we go to the cafe in Venice, and Jonas is like, I mean, he's playing in about 5 hours at the Greek, and he drops in, and he had like 4 cappuccinos, but they were like, I mean, there was like 80% sugar and then cappuccinos. We went to the studio, we banged out the incredible parts, Jonas Hellborg, bass player, incredible. Drove him to the Greek or wherever, and boom, that was it. And so that set the kind of pace for this album with Michael. And so this was at the high tide of my music starting to break out into a worldwide audience. At that point, Dreamtime Return was just starting to become this project that would take me to Australia. And I did these tracks with Michael, and we stopped at that point. I flew to Australia to do this whole piece with the film crew that would then inspire the whole Dreamtime Return album. Meanwhile, we got a record deal on BMG Novus while I'm in Australia. I get a call, hey, we got a deal with Michael and I for, that was the jazz label that Steve Backer had at that time. And so I got back from Australia and then flew directly then to Woodstock, New York, and we finished tracking the album there when he brought David Torn in at that point.
Oh.
So, and then at that point we were hanging in New York and, going to party with John Hassel. I mean, you're just like living the dream. I mean, you're just like...
This is a dream. When you first met Michael, was it was he hip to your work? I mean, he knew your work already, right?
Yeah, he knew my work through Ethan,
Beautiful.
and so we were already, in a
He's always, he told me in our first, he goes, I'm always looking for different kind of cats. Like he's just into the art itself. He loves being off the grid, and he's not afraid to promote it. And he's just been, I can just feel him.
no, he's an explorer of where the next
Where's searching for the sound, right?
searching for the next lost continent of amazing music, and that's how he met up with David Beale, who do you know David Beale's work?
I'm not that hip to that. No.
So they did this album later on, a little bit later on, called The Big Picture, and they were playing all triggered pads. Like if you just zoom down and look at this real quick, it was like this kind of thing. It's like triggering samples. And so David went on to be Joe Cocker's drummer, and he was a much younger guy, but he had this ferocious like thing at that time of using pads for triggering, and I think that really brought him and Michael together. And we did a concert in Palo Alto together, actually, the three of us.
At Stanford or where?
At a college. It was a space music concert. I actually have a picture I can show you, and it's with Michael Carabello.
Another hero. I mean, I've done.
I saw in your site there.
Are you? Well, yeah, that's a pretty antiquated site. I cannot believe that Carabello was playing congas
with us?
Yeah, and that is fantastic.
Oh yeah, that was just genre bending, just stuff right there. And so yeah, then more opportunities unfolding, But so at that point, the album, we tracked it. I got back from Australia, and at that point we had a record deal. And then the next thing we do is we fly to San Francisco. At that point, Michael was living in San Rafael. And where do we mix it? Different fur.
Dr. Patrick Gleason. I've spent several nights at his, what a beautiful man. Go ahead.
Man, I love that interview. I just heard that.
I've done a bunch. I've done some video stuff with him, but I mean, you went. So did you crash a different fur?
We didn't. I was staying at Michael's house.
Okay, you said
we were recording it for.
And we so awesome.
We were mixing it there, and so Patrick would drop down in now and then because he was living, I think, still there. And I'd met him before when I was traveling from L.A. up to Seattle to play in the planetarium up there. And Danny Sofer, who worked at Oberheim, all the interconnected stuff, he knew Patrick at that time. So we stopped in there just in his apartment that was up above Different Fur. So that's how we came into that piece. So yeah, the Michael Shreve piece was it was such an expander for me in terms of reaching out into, that world, the world that you grew up with, and then being validated, being respected, was really powerful. And we did that fantastic album, The Leaving Time, which it kind of came and went. It was so unique and fit between different worlds, and then that record label at the time really didn't know what to do with it. It was such a unique, album that blended ambient and jazz and rock and progressive or whatever, all that sort of, not necessarily jazz, but definitely had the strong rock quality to it, and the progressive piece, and then of course electronic piece there. So
I've been cooking here. We're gonna have to do like 3 or 4 more interviews. We've already been cooking for 50 minutes here, but I just wanted you to talk to the audience. It's just sort of an ethereal question, but can you talk about your concept of love and how you bring love to the world?
Man, that's a beautiful question. As I grow,
because we need some authentic love from everybody now. I mean, that no matter what, moving forward, part of it's being vulnerable. But you can riff on it any way you want.
No, I mean, the first word there is vulnerable, and having the courage to just step into the unknown and embrace it with compassion and humility and respect, and the ability to take ownership of your vulnerabilities and to your desire to be quiet, and to be gentle, to be expressive in ways that may seem not current with what's happening. But go with that feeling. And when Structures from Silence just came through me, that was so minimal. It was so quiet, and it was so filled with love, the love of creativity, the love of sharing that feeling with the world, whoever would want to hear it.
Sure.
And there's a really big piece in a lot of my music that is about mortality. There's like Structures had a lot of death in it. And there's a lot of that quality, that feeling of life and death in a lot of my music. And
Like shedding of old skin, rebirth, regeneration. I mean, clearly you're here. You're still here.
yeah, death. But I think, I had a very dramatic near-death experience myself, which has been written about out in the desert, on a motorized vehicle, and kind of got completely shot out of my body. Had the whole grandiose, full-on experience of then navigating my way back into staying here and being here. So it gave me a taste of the quality of life, and how precious that is, and how amazing it is, and how expressing that quality of silence and that quality of embracing vulnerability and embracing the unknown, and having that courage to put it out like that. And in the early days, it was
hard. Believe me, it took me
you-
a couple years I listened back to my early interviews with all these master Jack DeJohnette, and I'm stumbling over my questions, and they could see that at least I was coming from an earnest place, but they helped me find my voice. So I know those early years,
right.
that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude,
It just takes something that, I try to, when I'm working with younger artists and trying to, I'm not trying to, I'm instilling that by example or support, and just love and encouragement, and just setting a space where there's not judgment, and you're just in that present moment, just bringing it through and trusting and letting go to it. And then what comes back, the reflection, that's the fuel that I burn from. And that's why you hear the abundance of, there's just, so much pouring through, and there's no way to like tap it down or filter it. It has to keep going.
I love this. I know. I have to real quick. How did you meet Serena Gabriel?
Well, we both live in Tucson, and
Well, did you move down? You haven't lived there for a minute.
what's that now?
When did you move from Tucson?
Oh yeah, I've been in Tucson for. I consider where we're at. It's just Baja, Tucson.
Yeah, go ahead. Continue. Yeah. So I'm just saying, because she's very selective in the gigs that she performs. But you can just feel. I'm just wondering how you discovered her.
Right. Well, I would say we're traveling. A similar path where solar
contiguous.
culture,
Yeah.
galactic center. We were in an orbit that was, not connected but together. So we would see each other at these events, and I would hear about her through the people running the gallery there, the concert venue, and I was doing a series of concerts. During the little bit mid to later 2000s, I was doing concerts pretty regularly there, almost like I considered them to be like jazz engagements, where you'd set up for 3 days or a week or whatever.
Old school jazz, yeah, totally.
Where you'd get set up, and then you would just have another set and another set and another set. And then eventually I met Serena at one of my concerts there, and had heard about her playing didgeridoo, and heard about her talent and what was going on there. And then eventually I was doing a series called Electro Bloom within that same club, Galactic Center, and that was like every couple of months I'd put on electronic music night, and Serena came out, and at that point it was known that I was doing master classes and mentoring certain people. So that's when we met, and just the opportunity for us to work together. I mean, it kind of came out of a, Serena asking about masterclass and mentoring. And then when we got together, it quickly, I mean, that was, a big piece of it, but it was also in the process of learning studio techniques and how to make music and how to record at this whole other level that I was bringing forth. And Serena was already down the rabbit hole far, with what she was doing with all of her technology and the world that she was in.
So you could just get there were no training wheels. You could just roll right away.
Right, and there was a refinement in the tools that she was using, and there was just, it didn't take long because of how her perception and how her mind works and how sharp she is and talented and gifted that, she got that and just boom, just ran with it, so. But in the meantime, our ability to collaborate and make music together just was so natural and so easy and so deep that was another beautiful benefit to, discovering and working together. So then in the meantime, we're here working on our new solo, her solo work is ongoing, and then a new collaboration, our third collaboration now. So it's great, it's such a great balance, and what she brings to the world with her, she has a strong connection to electronic, but also, the acoustic,
Totally.
the acoustic realm and her ear and the way she tunes lyre and her different instruments is, it just fits right into this world beautifully. So.
I just feel so blessed. So much of my journey recently has really been about healing through rhythm. It's one of the very few things that resets my nervous system. But just to come down here today, to meet you in person, and to just sort of connect via Serena, just feels very sacred. And Steve Roach, I can't wait to do it again, man. Such an honor, man.
So honored you're here, and just the deepest respect and love.
We'll do it again, man.
Thank you.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.
Thank you.